Hello and welcome to Inside Out West. This is Cheltenham, the birthplace of the former Rolling Stone Brian Jones.
You're watching Inside Out West.
Hello. Now, he was described at his funeral here in Cheltenham as having little patience with authority, convention or tradition. But there can be no doubt that Brian Jones was the driving force behind the early success of the Rolling Stones. His death has always been a bit of a mystery, but tonight Tara Newley uncovers new evidence about what happened that fateful night back in the summer of '69.
Spend a night together. Now I need you more than ever. Let's spend a night together.
To most people, the Rolling Stones are Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. The truth is, the greatest rock and roll band in the world was started by this man, Brian Jones. But in 1969, just 2 years after this performance, he became the first rock and roll casualty, found dead in his swimming pool, aged 27. Ever since, there has been a riot of myths and conspiracy theories that still roll on today. Was it suicide, an accident, or even murder? At this stage, who knows?
Roll away the stone.
Roll away.
What did we say after?
I've joined this band of musicians to write a song for Brian, and thinking about the lyrics is raising serious questions about his death.
Let's roll away.
On lead guitar is Pat Townsend, a business partner with two of the Stones in the 1980s, who saw their first gigs back in 1963.
There was this shrill, high-pitched screaming noise, which I thought was a racing two-stroke motorcycle, which I was well acquainted with at that time. And as I got closer, it evolved into this fantastic music that I'd never heard before. It was very, very exciting because the music was so gutsy and so raunchy. And Brian shone out above all, absolutely. And he was obviously the front man of the band. I mean, I thought Mick was a tomboy or something. You know, I thought he was a girl. I didn't really even notice the others, to be quite honestly. Mick. It sort of, set me on this course, the wicked road of rock and roll. Yeah.
Lewis Brian Hopkin Jones was born in Cheltenham in 1942. The family lived in a middle-class suburb. Brian was an intelligent child, but his heart was always in music, especially the blues. After his first live performance in this basement, Brian headed for London to start a band. He put ads in papers, held auditions, and piece by piece created the Rolling Stones. Brian came up with the band's name, he was their musical leader, and he handled their business affairs. But Jagger and Richards soon took over writing the songs, and managers were brought in to handle the contracts and money. Brian's exit from the band and life was underway.
Brian was squeezed out.
He was absolutely, totally squeezed out. That's a good way of putting it, actually. Squeezed from under the stone.
They've rolled the years in the band.
Helping Pat out with our song today is Trevor Hobley, who manages the Brian Jones fan club.
And I remember reading the headlines, the sordid headlines about the death of the Rolling Stone, drink and drugs and everything else. And I remember thinking at the time that it was the hedonistic lifestyle of these rock icons of the 60s, and, this is the natural result of it, as all teenagers thought at the time.
When Trevor read the official evidence relating to Brian's death, he was suspicious.
And it very quickly became apparent to me that reading through their notes, reading through the information that's in the public domain, there was just something terribly wrong with this whole story.
Trevor has spent the last 3 years gathering evidence which challenges the official verdict of what happened. The story goes that there was a party at Brian's house in West Sussex. Late at night he went for a swim, but full of drink and drugs he drowned. After a very brief investigation, the coroner gave his verdict: death by misadventure. But there is evidence Brian Jones may not have had any illegal drugs in his body, and only a small amount of alcohol, and he was known to be a strong swimmer.
Brian Jones was believed to be an alcoholic and a drug addict. Now, any time you mention the words drugs, you automatically think of heroin, cocaine, and all the hallucinogenic drugs of the 60s. In actual fact, when you look at the pathology report on Brian Jones, the drugs in his body were prescribed medication. And for a seasoned drinker like Brian Jones was, to have the equivalent of 3.5 pints of beer inside your body, that doesn't really, with the type of lifestyle he led, lead to the conviction that Brian Jones died of drink and drugs.
Just 3 weeks before he died, Brian was sacked from the Rolling Stones. The management were tired of his lifestyle and the effect it was having on the business. They wanted him out.
The things that have been said about him publicly and the way his name was literally painted black over the years that was propaganda. Absolutely, I feel sure of that. Well, we've already done the broken heart bit.
What does that refer to, the broken heart?
Well, because they'd stolen his band away.
Right.
Taken his band away. It was his life.
It wasn't just the band they wanted to take from him, though. They wanted to take the name, the Rolling Stones, I think.
Yes.
And that might have been the real crux of things.
Well, there's a number of motives, possible motives for Brian's death. The major one that's been sort of debated very heavily just recently is the fact that Brian Jones owned the name the Rolling Stones. So in 1969, when Brian was reportedly going in another direction to the Rolling Stones and establishing a new band that might have included the likes of John Lennon, Jimi Hendrix, it would be incomprehensible to think of the Rolling Stones going under a different name and being as successful as they were if Brian decided to take that name away from him.
I just want to say something that was written by Shelley, and I think it goes with what happened to Brian.
2 days after he died, fans filled Hyde Park to pay tribute to Brian. The rest of the Stones put Brian's death behind them and moved on, as Pat soon discovered.
I suddenly thought back to any time that I'd ever mentioned anything of Brian or tried to get into a conversation with Brian with any of the Stones. There was definitely a Brian Jones no-go zone within the Stone zone, if you like.
There's no evidence the Stones or their management played any part in Brian's death, but there is now a real possibility that the coroner's verdict is wrong and somebody out there knows the truth. Conspiracy theories suggest a builder murdered Brian in a row over money. Others say his body finally gave up after years of abuse. And there are those who believe Brian's death goes back to his position as the founder of the band.
The circumstances surrounding the death of Brian Jones, the police investigation, the medical profession that carried out the autopsy, and also the coroner's inquest, there are certain flaws about all those 4 aspects of this crime, because a crime it is.
And there may be only one way to solve the mystery, if not the crime.
Brian Jones is the silent witness that in fact carries the exact cause of his death. And the only way that we're ever going to get to the truth is to have Brian Jones's body exhumed. Distasteful as it might seem to some people, this is almost an inevitable sort of consequence of what I've discovered over the 3 years.
Let's roll away the stone and let the truth on and on, yeah. And let the truth be known.
I would like to see the truth come out, what really did happen to him, but I'd like, above all, to see Brian's name cleared and the real truth of him brought out to the public before it's too late and before those that were responsible for it are dead and gone themselves. That's why I feel there is a sense of urgency in all this.
Long live Brian Jones.
Long live Brian Jones. Long live Brian Jones. Long live Brian Jones.
Thanks to Tara Newley for that report.